I'm going to call to order the Affordable Housing and Community Equity Development Commission for their meeting of February 27th, 2025. First, I'll call the roll. Patrick,
Present.
Karen Britton,
Present.
Terry Bond,
Present.
Elijah Herrig Blaine, not here yet, and Rich Halverson, not here. Okay. First order of business is the approval of the minutes from January 23rd. Do I hear a motion to accept the minutes from the 23rd of January?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes from January 23rd have been approved. Okay, the main order of business today is a presentation of the 2025 analysis of impediments to fair housing choice in the Baltimore region. It's a report that's done, I'm not actually sure how many years between reports. 5 years maybe? Dan can tell us. Dan Pontius, who's the housing policy coordinator from the Baltimore Area Council, is going to do that presentation for us. Josh, can you bring Dan in so that he can tell us about the impediments to fair housing? And there's Dan.
All right. Hello.
Hi, Dan.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, it's every
I don't know if you know who we are, so let's first do that.
Okay, great.
We're the Affordable Housing Community Equity Development Commission for the city of Annapolis. And our main focus is to talk about affordable housing and how we can increase the availability or the production, preservation, all aspects of affordable housing, and also fair housing for the city of Annapolis. We work on that as well. Tonight you have four of members of the commission, and I'm Nancy Libson, and I'm the chairman. And I'm going to let everybody else introduce themselves. So, Pat, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Patrick Sheridan, retired, but also on the Housing Authority, the City of Annapolis Board, and also worked in the federal government in rural housing service for a long time, along with CDA and a couple nonprofits. So a lot of housing experience.
So, Patrick and I go way, way back to the 90s, I guess, in our work in affordable housing. So, we've been around this stuff for quite a while. In fact, I would say whenever I worked at ACDS as one of my jobs, and when I worked there, I actually came to the meetings of the Baltimore Area Council as they were developing their AI report then, which was, I guess, in 2003. So I've been around this for a while as well. Karen, who's snuck out of the picture. There's Karen. Okay.
Hold on. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry that I muted myself. Hi, I'm Karen Britton. I have worked a lot with affordable housing through the United Way, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and the Lighthouse Shelter here. Right now I'm at the Visitors Center, but next week I'm back in nonprofit and human services where I feel like I belong. So thanks for coming to talk with us.
Great.
And hi, Dan.
Terry.
I'm Terry Bond. My background is in planning. I was a county community planner for both Anne Arundel, where I started, and then a long time in Prince George's. I did just about everything down there, and I retired in 2016. So now I'm volunteering here.
Great.
Denise, do you want to introduce yourself?
I've talked to Denise on the phone. Good to meet you.
Oh, okay. She's muted,
virtually.
right? There we
Yeah,
go.
there you
I'm
go.
sorry. And I'm Denise Ruffin. I'm a housing affordability specialist for the city of Annapolis. I come with a history of over 42 years in affordable housing. And I've done actual boots on the ground property management. I worked with the developers for the developer when they redeveloped two of the public housing developments there in Baltimore. 20 plus years with the state of Maryland as an asset manager. Worked for a nonprofit and did some housing development. So I'm kind of like on the nuts and bolts from beginning to the end. And what I mean is from, starting at the bottom and just going all the way up. So I have a lot of experience as well. And this commission has been wonderful working with them. Some of them we cross paths in our careers. At least I know Patrick and I have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you guys work together. I guess I didn't tell you about me. I work for a whole variety of different housing organizations, from a developer of rural housing, to the banking committee on the Hill, the housing subcommittee and banking
Wow.
committee. I worked for 10 years in the 90s, and ACDS for a year or two, and HUD for a year. Couldn't take it much more than that. Where else did I work? And then the last job was with a nonprofit association, Leading Age, where we worked on senior. I was in charge of all their senior housing,
Mhm.
where I crossed paths with Patrick again when he was with VOA. Who, by the way, Patrick, I've been hearing their ads on the radio all the time. Have you been hearing them?
Yeah, I actually heard the first one the other day. I think it was POP, like during the main drive time, which I don't know whether they got that for free or they had to pay, but it was kind of impressive.
Pretty interesting, yeah. Anyway, so Dan, welcome to you, and we're very glad that you're going to present your report to us. I've been reading through it. It has a ton of information in it, and it's fascinating. As part of the commission, we've been trying to figure out ways to look at fair housing and the availability of affordable housing here in Annapolis, and this does help us see the intersection between the two and the impediments. And so we look forward to hearing you present the findings of your report, and then maybe enter into a little bit of a discussion about how we can help overcome those impediments in the city of Annapolis. So, Dan, you're up.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. Boy, there's such a wealth of experience in this room, or in this virtual room here. That's terrific. I got my start in this type of work doing community development type work in Baltimore. I live in Baltimore City, and worked in community development, sort of neighborhood community development in the 2000s, and then did a couple of years with the city housing department in Baltimore, and then took this job in 2012. So I've worked with Kathy Koch quite a bit. I even worked with her a bit when I was at CPHA in the 2000s, but and work with, I think you mentioned Elisha's name. I work with him quite a bit now that he's at ACDS, and I work with Melissa Maddox Evans at the Housing Authority. So it's great to hear you're on the board there, Patrick. In fact, she is chairing. We kind of have chairs of each of the jurisdiction group and the Housing Authority group, and Melissa's chairing the Housing Authority group right now. She's terrific. Let me and so I got started just after the local government. So Nancy, you must have been involved when the very first one of these was done, the federal government did the regulations for this in 1995. And so we actually did one of the first regional ones in 1996. I mean, I wasn't involved, but Kathy Koch headed that up. She told me the story at one point about how she called all the other housing directors to say, wouldn't this be easier if we did it together? And so that was the birth of the first regional analysis. I think they updated it in the early 2000s, which was probably when you were involved and coming. I think BMC helped with that. And then HUD started to get on them in the late 2000s to say, hey, that's getting kind of old, that 1996 document. So they worked over it. It took them a while, but they finished one in 2012. And so I came here to help them implement the action steps there. And then the Obama administration passed a rule in 2015 that kind of tightened up the rules around this. and said, hey, you should really do it every 5 years before you do your 5-year consolidated plan. So every jurisdiction like Annapolis that gets money directly from HUD has to do a 5-year plan, consolidated plan for how you're going to use the
Right.
HUD money. And so as they started, and actually HUD in the late 2010s got all of us on the same cycle in this region, and everybody's latest was going to start July 1st, 2020. So we did one coming up to that. So that's our last one. And now it's 5 years later. So they're starting their new con plans that start July 1st, 2025. And so we're doing it again, even though while we were doing the last one, the first Trump administration repealed the 2015 rule that kind of set the guidelines, but the advocates were all saying, hey, you should do it anyway. And we're like, all right, we'll do it voluntarily. And then the Biden administration, and then they repealed the whole thing. Just as we were finishing up, they repealed the whole rule. Then the Biden administration reestablished the definition of affirmatively furthering fair housing in 2021. And then they proposed a rule for a new system for planning in 2023, but then they never finalized that, and they actually withdrew it before President Trump was inaugurated. And then, Denise, what you were mentioning, I think just a day or two ago, they repealed the 2021 just definition of affirmatively furthering fair housing. So there's really
would not
no
want to do
regulation.
that.
What's that?
We would not want to affirmatively further fair housing, please.
Yeah, now in the meantime, Delegate Brooke Lierman, now our state's controller, got a bill through the state legislature. So now there's a state duty to affirmatively further fair housing. So, and a number of states did that after the first Trump administration repealed that 2015 rule. A number of states said we want to make sure that, and then there still is the statutory duty too. But so that's probably more exposition than you need. So let me see if I can, I have a little slide. So I put together some slides that I tried to focus on. I tried to make sure to highlight the Annapolis information here. So let me see if I can. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen and then do the presentation. So here we go. Here's the few slides, or a number of slides. I'll try to go pretty quickly so we can have some discussion. First of all, this is our collaboration. It includes these 5 county 11 jurisdictions and the city of Annapolis, and you can see all the housing authorities for each of the jurisdictions participate as well. Carroll County and Queen Anne's County are in our metro area, but they get their HUD funds through the state of Maryland, so they don't have this planning and reporting requirements. We're kind of, for the regional, we kind of, this is sort of the map that we're kind of trying to undo. This is affirmatively furthering fair housing. This was the epitome of the federal government stepping in and saying, we're going to subsidize wealth building home ownership for white people only in the suburbs. And we're going to ward off that kind of investment in areas that are more predominantly people of color, especially African Americans at the time. And so those redlined areas got all the public housing that got built in Baltimore City, while the suburbs just kind of set the template for the construction of the suburbs. And there is not a redlining map for Annapolis, although, as you folks know, I mean, there was segregation in Annapolis, certainly. And so there were the same kinds of patterns, the old Fourth Ward, there were the same kinds of patterns of segregation and disparities in investment in Annapolis as well. So when Congress passed the Fair Housing Act in 1968, after a lot of unrest that was geared around this segregation and restriction from opportunity, they said it's not enough just to stop discriminating. You have to affirmatively undo that damage of those policies. So this is the actual statute in the Fair Housing Act, which is what we have left now, essentially, since the regulations have been all repealed now. And then HUD passes this duty on through its granting of funds. And this law has resulted in judgments. One was against HUD itself in 2005 here. And so the remedy for that was primarily focused on Baltimore City, and it ultimately set up a 4,400 voucher mobility program where there's a whole nonprofit organization that we work closely with, the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership, that administers these vouchers and helps families, especially families with children, find homes in safe communities with access to good public schools. So that's sort of helping low-income people who've been restricted from existing opportunity areas access them. The flip side of affirmatively furthering fair housing is bringing investment to these areas that have not gotten them historically. And so the HUD's Choice Neighborhoods program, hopefully that will continue. They're finishing up the redevelopment of Perkins homes in Baltimore City. That's the top image. And then, as you folks I think know, HACA is working to redevelop Harbor House Eastport Terrace through they have a planning grant right now and hope to get an implementation grant. And then Baltimore City, the Housing Authority of Baltimore City is working on that same process in Poe Homes, which is in Southwest Baltimore. So we held 3 large stakeholder meetings. 2 of them were virtual like this, but then we really wanted to have an in-person meeting. So October 1st, we got together at the Harriet Tubman Center in Columbia, Maryland, which was terrific. And so had a bunch of people in person and then a bunch of other people online. So we've had a bunch of stakeholder involvement in this process. We also put together at some members of our housing committee, which has a bunch of stakeholders on it, suggested working groups. So we pulled together one on enforcement in the private market, one on renters in particular, and one on housing supply overall and where do we cite affordable housing. We had public agency, housing agency co-chair and a private sector co-chair in each one. And so anyway, that's sort of how we got a bunch of public input. Now I'm going to run through a bunch of stats, and feel free to stop me if you have a question about one of these slides. But this is sort of a comparison. The region, we looked at sort of the demographics. In our last fair housing plan, we used 2016 census data and we used 2022 census data. So it's sort of a 6-year gap in our data here. So you can see this is the region overall. Our region grew slightly, became slightly less white, and the growing populations were, especially the Hispanic population in Baltimore, in the Baltimore region, actually grew by about 20%. It's not really reflected here, I think, but the Asian population did grow as well. And then all others is getting bigger in terms of how people identify. And then Annapolis had somewhat similar dynamics, although more growth in the Black population, a bit of shrinkage in the Hispanic population. So anyway, those are just sort of the broad kind of demographic trends since our last analysis. One of the things we pay attention to are racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, which line up quite a bit. These are areas that are mostly people of color and that have at least 3 times our region's poverty rate. So 36% poverty. The dark orange census tracts, you can see they line up in Baltimore quite a bit with the redlined areas. So these are areas that we need to just really focus on revitalization. There is and then we looked at edge RCAPs, which are just below that level of poverty. And you can see there's a number in Baltimore. And then there's one that was identified in Annapolis. I think this is the area kind of around Cars Beach, I guess. But although I checked the censusreporter.com, which has the 2023 data, and that poverty rate is way down. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that thing on our that aspect of our map, whether that is truly a concentrated areas of poverty or not. But what we are calling for regionally is investments in those areas, like Baltimore City has a new strategy to rehabilitate vacant homes on a large scale, partnership with the state on that. There's the Red Line Transit line proposed in Baltimore, education investments through the Kerwin Blueprint, which obviously the state is having a challenge with right now, and affordability preservation. So those are sort of the strategies that we were looking at there. And then we looked at access to opportunity in a couple ways. The Maryland DHCD is the main funder of affordable housing through its low-income housing tax credit program. And DHCD uses this opportunity map with these indicators that are listed on the left here. And then the blue areas on this map are the higher opportunity areas. And so there are some incentives to award low-income housing tax credits for family housing that's open to families in these areas. and we looked at where people live, broken down by racial group. And here you see sort of the legacy of that redlining in the early 20th century. In general, most people live in opportunity areas in the region, and that's true for all racial groups except African Americans in our metropolitan area. So that's sort of a continuing legacy of that we are working to change. Then we looked at the residents of folks who live in low-income housing tax credit program, because there was actually a fair housing agreement signed in 2017. There was a complaint brought against Maryland DHCD for the way they allocate their tax credits in the Baltimore region. The complaint was that they were focusing disproportionate their family housing in these formerly redlined areas, these areas that already had a lot of poverty, rather than giving their residents access to the opportunity of the region. And so they have just finished building 1,000 units of affordable housing in opportunity areas. Some of it's in Annapolis. And we were worried, is that just going to continue the patterns in the suburban areas, in the higher opportunity areas, or is that going to give modest income African-American families access to those areas of opportunity? And this analysis that we did with data we got from Maryland DHCD shows that it does give Black families that opportunity, that homes created by the state through its low-income housing tax credit program are, as you can see, disproportionately serve African-American residents. And it's about 72% as opposed to a 31% share of the population. And when those homes are built in those opportunity areas, African-American families gain access to them. But you can see that disproportionately, they're still, even now, these are the ones funded in the last 15 years, and they're still predominantly being located in the lower opportunity areas of the metropolitan area. This is getting a little bit in the weeds, but the state has a competitive 9% program where they can influence where things go due to scoring. And then there's a non-competitive 4% program that's less valuable. And so we wanted to tease out, because we were never able to change, kind of separate them in our analysis before, but we were able to do that here. And it shows that the scoring is really important, because the 9% homes are located more. It's still only about a third in areas of opportunity since 2010, but they are located at a higher level in areas of opportunity. And then the 4% credits, and these are new units, not rehabilitated units, but new units. So you can decide where they go. They're only about 20% are located in areas of opportunity. So we've been trying to get the state to do more scoring incentives to help folks live in areas of opportunity, and they've kind of resisted that. And so this was our pitch to them that, hey, you really should do that. Here's an interesting, I pulled up this slide because this shows just all affordable housing open to families in the metropolitan area. And it shows that Annapolis is somewhat similar to Baltimore, and in some way, and even more so, actually. What this does is it compares the share, the blue bars here are each jurisdiction's share of the region's total homes. So, Baltimore City is 26.4% of all the homes in the Baltimore region. And, Annapolis, as a relatively small city, is 1.7% of the total homes in the whole metropolitan area. But then when you look at publicly assisted homes open to families with children, the city of Annapolis has 6.5% of all of those homes in the whole region. So it actually has quite a bit of, proportionally, has quite a bit of publicly assisted homes. Has its own housing authority, has public housing, which only outside of Annapolis, only Baltimore City and Anne Arundel County have in the Baltimore area. I guess Havre de Grace has a little bit up there. So anyway, Baltimore City also has a higher share of assisted homes open to families than it does regular housing. And then you can see all the other suburban jurisdictions have, don't have as high a share of the affordable housing open to families as they do a share of the overall homes. So this is kind of an interesting slide, I think, just in terms of sort of are, does each jurisdiction have its share? We also did our own opportunity map. This is something we did in our last one as well, and we refreshed that map. We worked with the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership that does that regional mobility program to do this. These are the indicators that we use. We use some education indicators because we think, access to high quality schools is really important. And then some rental housing indicators. But you can see the map is, very similar. And we looked at who lives where, and it has a very similar pattern here where the number one is the highest opportunity quintile, and so you have higher non-Hispanic white populations and Asian populations in the higher opportunity areas, and then as higher share of African American population as it goes towards the lower opportunity areas. And then the key thing is looking at our, how are our housing programs interacting with that? Are we reinforcing those patterns that are kind of left over from that 1937 redlining map, or are we countering them? And this chart shows that we still have some work to do, because the bottom bar on this chart shows that the total homes in the region are kind of evenly distributed among the quintiles. The dark purple are the top two quintiles. The green is the lower two opportunity quintiles, and the light purple is the medium. And you can see that all of the publicly assisted housing, whether it's open to families, the top one, general occupancy, this is the Fair Housing Act accessible to people with ambulatory disabilities, people who use a wheelchair or something like that. The reason we separate these out is because actually elderly housing tends to be more in opportunity areas than family housing. And in fact, for a lot of our, recent history, in fact, this is part of what the fair housing complaint against the state was, is that the suburban jurisdictions were building a lot of homes just restricted to elderly people in the nicer parts of the region. And so the argument was you really have to open that to families with children. And then the housing choice voucher holders, obviously vouchers are supposed to, the idea is you can live anywhere, but then when you look at where people actually live, it's not by itself, not kind of really offering people that ability to move and access these areas of opportunity without a lot of help. So that's sort of the regional picture. And then I pulled out the ones that separate out the city of Annapolis. So the city of Annapolis actually has, compared to the region, this is compared to that top bar where, we have less than 10% in the very highest opportunity areas, but Annapolis has, a good 15% of its housing, and then a whole bunch in the middle opportunity quintile, which I think is significant as well. And so, in fact, more than anybody but any jurisdiction but Howard County. And Howard County is a largely high opportunity county. So that's sort of a bar chart that shows how, and this is this is publicly assisted housing open to families, with which Annapolis has quite a bit of. This is like 1,800 units of affordable housing. And then here's the map of the region that sort of shows how a lot of these homes are concentrated in the green lower opportunity areas of Baltimore City. And this has an inset for Annapolis where you can see Annapolis homes specifically, and you can see that a bunch of them are in the higher opportunity parts of the city of Annapolis. Then here are the homes that are restricted to senior citizens, and you can see Annapolis, according to our data, Annapolis doesn't have nearly as many of those. A lot of suburban jurisdictions built a lot of publicly subsidized homes that are off limits to families with children. They're only for senior citizens. And those tend, as you can see from this chart, those tend to be, Annapolis is more in the middle of the pack here in terms of access to opportunity for homes open to, restricted to senior citizens. And here's the map of those homes as well. And then one of the things that we are working to do, working with Melissa Maddox Evans and the other housing authorities, we started this in 2016. We got a grant from HUD, a seed grant from HUD. And all the housing, we learned this from Chicago, which was doing it and has stopped doing it. So I think we're the only ones in the country who are doing this now. But all of our housing authorities chipped in vouchers proportional to the size of their voucher programs. So we have 193 in the pool now, and most of those are from Baltimore City. Annapolis, has a relatively small voucher program, so it's only 3 vouchers in that pool of 193 from the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis. But what we do is we put out a regional RFP for developers, and we say, hey, if you need, would like some help financing and would like to provide some homes for very low income people in some of these safe communities with access to good public schools, we will consider, we have a whole whole scoring system to award those vouchers that we think works pretty well. And so we've awarded 150 vouchers to developments that have 1,000 units total in them, 13 developments around the region, including Town Courts and Willows at Town Courts, which is open and has 6 families living in our units, and Willows at Forest Drive, which I'm not sure if it's under
construction.
Is it under
It's
construction?
under construction. Yep.
So we have 11, so we helped finance that. And so Annapolis gets, 17 units of affordable housing, even though it only chipped in 3 vouchers. That's kind of how it works. Like this, we have not yet awarded a development in Baltimore City yet. So a lot of these are Baltimore City vouchers, but they're being used in opportunity areas of the region. And then we try to help people live in these units proportional to the housing authorities that contributed the vouchers. So a lot of these folks are Baltimore City residents who are now getting to live, if they want to, in a safer community in our suburban jurisdictions. So unfortunately, that HUD seed money provided mobility counseling money, so we were able to help people with their credit rating if that was a problem to leasing up, or tenant history, budgeting, that kind of thing. But we've run out of that money and we need to find another source of it. So we actually did not do an RFP this year for the first time. And that's one of our steps. We also, this is the last part of the data piece, we're looking at racial homeownership gaps. That's something we started focusing on in 2020. You see the region has a 30-point gap between non-Hispanic white people at 76% homeownership and Black families at 46% homeownership. And then every jurisdiction, including Annapolis, have pretty good sized gaps, racial gaps in homeownership. And for the first time this year, we looked at the overall supply of housing, because Brian Green, who was at HUD for a long time and now is at the National Association,
Brian
makes a compelling case here that really we're not building housing like we used to, just overall. And so that makes it very hard for people who don't already have wealth in housing to break into homeownership. So that's sort of our statistics. And then I have some slides here on our action plans. So we have regional action plans, and then there are jurisdiction plans for each jurisdiction that participated. So regionally, the jurisdictions want to keep coordinating regionally and keep supporting my position at BMC. We want to continue convening the housing committee, which we kind of paused to do this document, but that's sort of a monthly forum that's open to anyone, and we have a lot of stakeholders come, and we do it virtually, and we discuss key issues related to fair housing in that monthly group. We want to sustain the regional project-based voucher program, and we need to identify funding for mobility counseling. We want to, as I kind of mentioned, we want Maryland DCD to adjust their scoring on the 9% low-income housing tax credit program to have more homes built in areas of opportunity, while targeting that 35%, of the tax credits to revitalization strategies like choice communities. We want to continue to preserve affordable housing. And then we have a few steps related to the renter small group to help make sure that renters overall, not just subsidized renters, have, and they are disproportionately people of color in our region. That's sort of the flip side of the homeownership gaps, is that renters are disproportionately non-white. And so we want to take some steps to make sure the renters have safe places to live. We want to address racial homeownership gaps, including kind of our big new step here was to convene the planning and housing directors every 6 months to try to work on addressing obstacles to building new housing I know I've talked to Chris Jacobiak in Annapolis. I know your new comprehensive plan kind of looks at that, how can we kind of do some infill and add some homes even in Annapolis. But this is a bigger problem in the counties. There's a lot of restrictions because of crowded schools on building homes in a lot of the counties in the region. And then we want to address barriers. This is sort of the revitalization piece that I mentioned before. That some of this is kind of in the weeds, but these are all steps that we've been kind of working on that help bring opportunity to areas that have excluded it historically, and that help lower income people access the opportunity that already exists in our region. And then the last thing, a lot of this came out of our enforcement working group. We want to take steps to help promote fair housing enforcement as well. Including working with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, which does the bulk of the enforcement, to make sure that complaint process is as good as it can be. We're working right now. Maryland is one of 11 states, that doesn't allow recording of fair housing tests. When you do paired tests and you send people to a realtor or a landlord who they only differ by protected class, and you see if they get treated differently. Right now they have to leave and then write everything down really carefully. But in most states, you can just press record on a recorder while you're in there, or iPhone, your phone or something like that. And so we're trying to get that exception written into Maryland's all-party consent law. And then these are the Annapolis action steps. These are the last couple slides here. So you can see that Annapolis's steps are to enhance fair housing resources and compliance through awareness, through distributing information, revising the zoning code to expand choice for people with disabilities. And then I think the last slide here is to encourage development of additional affordable housing.
Which is what we theoretically do.
And increase ownership opportunities for underrepresented households. So that's getting at the racial home ownership gaps. And I think that is it. Yeah, comments are due tomorrow. So that's where we were thinking, better to do the meeting now, and just do the notice as best we can, especially since there are no regulations really deciding how exactly we have to do this. But we did try to do like at least one public meeting or public hearing in each jurisdiction. And so this is the one for Annapolis. And then the local governments and housing authorities will finalize this in March after we consider all the comments. We're going to print like 100 final copies. So if people want those, let us know. And that's it. I think, there's my information, but I'm happy to go back to any of the other slides if you want to, if I was going a little too quick, or to take any questions or hear any thoughts that you might have.
Thank you very much for doing this presentation. Is there some way you could send the whole presentation to
Slides?
I guess
Sure.
to Denise, and then she can get it to all of us so we have it as a quicker reference than 500 and whatever pages.
Yeah, there's a
which
lot
is
of
a
stuff.
lot.
lot of
There's a lot of
stuff
stuff.
in that document. Yeah. And we didn't get at least for the draft, we didn't get an executive summary done, which is too bad. So we'll have to see how best it can be packaged for the final.
Yeah. So that's one thing, but it's packed with information, which is
It is a bit,
amazing.
I have tended to use it as kind of an encyclopedia, actually. I find that over the 5 years, I'll be working with something and I'll say, what's this statistic? Wait, I think that might have been in the AI, and I'll look back on it and sure enough it was. So yeah, it's not designed, it's probably not best to be, it's not like bedtime reading, really.
No, it's not.
But it does have a bunch of stuff. You can just kind of flip through and look at the charts and the maps. I think those really do have the key statistics that we were trying to highlight, like I did here in this presentation. Then you can kind of look at the text to kind of explain it. And then the bottom line really are the action plans at the end. And the
Right.
idea is that
Right.
each jurisdiction includes these action steps in their consolidated plan, and then that's how they make sure that as they operate their housing programs with federal housing funds, they are affirmatively furthering fair housing.
So I'm going to kick off some discussion or question. Given what we're witnessing now in Washington, in terms of all the cuts and all the backtracking of everything that we have looked at and held dear for a number of years, what do you think the prognosis is for implementation of any of the goals of the communities? I mean, can the state funds and the local funds and initiatives fill the gaps? Because we're not going to have a whole lot of federal impetus, that's for sure.
Yeah, I
Has
think
anyone taught? I mean, obviously this was done before we knew how horrible it was going to be, but I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts about that. There's a lot of stuff in there that is not going to be possible, given the future that we so far see.
Yeah, I don't know if Denise has heard thing. I mean, I feel like the impact on HUD is not clear yet. I mean, obviously they're trying to cut all kinds of things. And then
They're
it's
there
sort
right
of-
now.
It's
and it's
gonna be that,
exactly, yeah.
yeah,
So
the
Yeah,
Grim
the
Reaper
boys are
is
there
at the
now.
door. Yeah.
so
And you know, in all while you were doing this presentation, Dan, that question just kept rolling around in my head. We don't even know which way to go. We're at the fork in the road because we don't know what's gonna happen, as far as, you know, housing, period. And they don't understand what it all encompasses and what HUD does. I mean, if we don't know about any other government agency, I think all of us on this meeting can really recognize how cuts that they make, how it will affect, the communities all across the nation, and so we can almost understand and have compassion for what the other agencies do that we don't work in. But this one's scary because we work so hard to get where we are over the course of 40 or 50 years, fair housing, equitable housing, and now it's like, okay, are we going to just stop right here, or are we going to roll backwards? And
Yeah,
it's
I mean, I'm afraid, HUD's an easy target for them. I mean, when Trump was in
yes,
last time, he went after it. So I'm just, you use that word equity. I mean, I'm very fearful unless, I mean, this is a public meeting, but unless Congress does their job, unless our representatives start to put some muzzles on this, but otherwise, I'm very
yeah.
fearful. I'm very fearful.
Because we're already in a affordable housing crisis as it is. We don't have enough. And now if it stops, or if it stops or it gets cut, what are the people gonna do? But I did have a question for you, Dan, and it came to my mind and went away. I noticed that most of your focus here, you talked about the low income housing tax credit program. And I guess that is just the way that we would provide housing through that one particular program. We're not providing housing under the project-based Section 8 multifamily developments because they haven't been doing anything there. So I guess the one reliable source that we can count on is the low income housing tax credits. That's what I'm getting from the meeting. So I guess when they cut the IRS, that's the end of the credits, right? Just don't know.
Well, those
No.
credits are in statute, I mean, I think we're going to try, it's going to take a little while to play out, I think, but we're going to see, what they can't cut because it's in statute. And
Right.
so I think that is the advantage of the low-income housing tax credit program. I believe, it's not even operated by HUD. It's
Right,
administered by
right.
the Treasury Department.
Right.
So that's that. And then I think that the voucher program, I'll be really curious to see funding levels for that. I mean, there you really are talking about like throwing people out of their housing onto, and
Yeah.
so that is something that Congress and the president have not been willing to do. And I think that would be hard. I would hope that that would be hard to do. So I think between the low-income housing tax credit and the housing choice voucher program, now what the home program, we'll see with these other programs that are in HUD's
Yeah.
budget. We'll see what happens with those CDBG, so we'll see what
Yeah.
happens with those.
Kind of heartbreaking. Just kind of heartbreaking because we just see how it really will affect the most vulnerable in this country,
Well, and we'll see. I mean, all kinds of jurisdictions use home funds and CDBG funds. It's not just blue states that use and need that money. So so I'm curious. I think we have to see how this all plays out. I mean, it's a there's sort of a lot of uncertainty, but I think we really need to kind of see how it all
Well, we have to keep fighting for it though, right?
Yeah, we'll see what Congress does, because we'll see what Congress does, I guess,
So
too.
far, it's roll over and play dead. Uh,
I had a question. When I was in Winston-Salem with the United Way, I was housing quality standards certified, and their standards are pretty high for housing inspections, and I think they're a little bit looser here.
Hmm.
I'm a renter. My house would not pass inspection.
Mm.
Well, I wonder about how strict the inspection standards are that discourage landlords to want to work with housing programs.
With the voucher program?
Yeah.
Are you talking about HQS for the voucher program in particular?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, we have, actually since our last report, I think it was it 2000? It might have been, Maryland has source of income protection now. So
Yeah.
landlords are not supposed to
Yeah.
be able to say, oh, I don't want to deal with your inspection program.
Oh, I know that they can't say that, but I know that they do, because I was landlord engagement with the the Lighthouse Shelter here, and then you call and they're like, oh, their workaround is our house won't pass inspection.
Oh,
So
interesting.
that is their workaround. But I mean, it was real strict in North Carolina. I mean, if plugs weren't grounded, tiny cracks in windows, and they were like, we just can't afford at this rent price to get everything perfect. So I just didn't
Mhm.
know if you've seen a deterrent for working with our programs because of that, or there's any loosening of any
Well,
requirement.
what we are trying to, and I don't know, I haven't been close enough to that inspection program to understand how restrictive it is or not.
Yeah.
But, it's obviously administered by different housing authorities. But one thing we would like, and this is a resource issue too, but we would like to have kind of a robust testing program, because I think that's the only way to have these protections enforced, which are state level protections. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking it's so strict that it's hard for people to be compliant when they're taking the bottom rung of the, rent that they could expect.
you're
As-
saying it's hard even in there because we have tried to, I think housing authorities are trying to keep payment standards competitive for
Yeah.
these community areas. So I would hope it would be
I
enough.
personally don't see the inspections being that strict. I mean,
Okay.
it's the same standards that they use under the protocol of housing, because if you compare all the inspection, they are the same. The city of Annapolis, every landlord has to if they rent property in Annapolis, they have to go through the inspection. And
Yeah.
when you compare the two inspections, the city of Annapolis uses the International Property Maintenance Code, I think it's called IPMC. And when I compare that to the HUD inspections, they look at the same exact
Yeah.
thing. So I don't see a disparity, but if I'm gonna move into your house, well, I expect it to be within the code. So
Right.
I don't see it as being rigorous. I think what it is it's repetitive,
Right.
which is, overbearing sometimes for landlords. But I thought when they determined the market rents for the housing choice vouchers, that was one of the things that they factored into the rent was the cost or something towards the cost of doing the inspections.
Oh,
Okay.
that's good. I mean, like my windows don't open. That would never pass
Well-
inspection.
Well,
Yeah, that doesn't sound so
do you
good.
own the house?
No, I rent.
Well,
Renting.
then
Yeah.
call your local municipality and see what happens. Because if they
Yeah,
don't.
no, that's okay. I think my point is I like my house. I'm glad to be where I'm living. So I think getting people in housing and then that was my whole thing. Like, yeah, I can stick
No.
to my landlord, but I'm okay.
Yeah,
Then I live where I want to live.
but
One experience I had, this is Baltimore, not Annapolis, but I worked for, as I mentioned, I worked for the city housing department like 2010 to 2012. It was during the stimulus payments in the Great Recession. So there was a bunch of
Mhm.
weatherization money.
yeah,
We were trying to leverage that for green and healthy homes. And I started a pilot program for rental housing because the city was only supporting those types of
Mhm.
renovations for owner occupants, lower income owners.
Mhm.
But that the majority of the city had just flipped to renters over the foreclosure crisis. So
Yeah.
we started working with landlords, and I thought, oh, we'll just enforce code, that because whereas with homeowners, if they can't afford the repairs, you need to help them out. But I thought, well, we'll just enforce code, and then I did find some landlords who use housing choice vouchers wanting to get in on the program. And what I found was that those homes were in the best shape, actually. And I think it was because the voucher payment standard really
Good.
did make sure that they had the resources to be able to keep
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
with the homes.
Okay. That totally makes sense. I was just checking. Because my house clearly passed inspection, but I'm sure it was
You gotta stop saying that. You're on public TV, girl.
true. Somebody's gonna look at my address. I'll be homeless.
No,
I'll be
you
living
will
with
not.
Terry.
Well, I mean, that was my experience in Baltimore as well, because we thought, yeah, we'll just enforce code, but then we really deferred to the tenants, and we found that a lot of the tenants didn't want to enforce code because they felt like they were getting a break on their rent in return for living in
Yeah.
substandard housing.
Yeah.
That's a
So
break.
that's a tough one.
Yeah.
But we did, I mean, on the regional action steps, we did want to try to make sure that every jurisdiction has sort of a minimum health and safety standard that can be enforced, and that and the results of those inspections can be easily accessed and things like that.
Yeah.
Karen, and there's some jurisdictions that don't like the city of Annapolis requires inspections, and some different counties require inspections, and then there's some that don't, so if every municipality did everything the same across the board, then you would have these inspections everywhere. But I know in the city we do them, but I know Anne Arundel County doesn't. Like, you don't have to go and get an inspection in order to rent a unit. I don't know
Yeah.
where you live, and I'm not asking.
I'm not saying it now, that's for sure.
So, and I don't know how it works in Howard County. I don't know how all the other counties work, but in my experience, they really didn't go out. Your affordable housing communities got inspected because of different regulations, but I don't know about individual
Yeah.
landlords.
for-
I don't know about private
For the voucher
communities.
program, there's a standard. I mean,
Right. The standard is the same.
bottom
Nancy.
level, but there's a standard, and anything that's in the voucher program is going to have an inspection.
Right.
But I do like that Dan was talking about that they did help, landlords, because they do focus a lot on the homeowners, but the landlords are who we need to provide the
Yeah,
affordable
the
housing.
voucher program. Yeah, yeah.
And
Mhm.
sometimes they don't want to rent because they don't want to go through that inspection process, and then some don't want to rent because their neighbors don't want. There's so much discrimination out there in housing that we just don't see unless you're boots on the ground witnessing it yourself,
Yeah.
as far as the voucher holders, and that's what ends up putting them in non-opportunity areas sometimes because the communities they like to go to for some reason or the other, they face, nope, not in my neighborhood kind of,
Oh,
you know,
100%. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. I liked it way back when we all lived amongst each other. So different growing up as a kid because the neighborhood I lived in, everybody lived in. I lived in a high area of immigration at the time. So you lived amongst all kinds of people, and it was
Yeah.
just, it was really, really great growing up. And somehow we just got pushed in the different directions.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Yeah, anyway, for Dan, one thing the city of Annapolis did is we did implement a program to aid private landlords for repairs in return for some affordability. And it was funded, but no one used it that I understand.
right, no,
Oh,
no,
really?
Then we redirected the money to HAPA anyway, which we needed it there just as much. But I don't know, maybe Denise knows, is there any funds left in that account or is
no,
that?
that money went, they felt it would have went to a better use with, where they sent it. It wasn't a big pot of money. And
$1,000, I think, or something. It
five,
wasn't a lot.
it was 500,000. And then when you look at
500,000.
Yeah,
we discussed it at our meeting here.
Right.
yeah.
We
Yeah.
did.
Dan,
So anyway, the program's on the books. It just needs to be funded by the city, I guess, but it hadn't gotten used by anybody besides the housing authority.
well, that's where they reallocated it to. They voted to reallocate it over there. So it would probably go into better use given the situation as it is right now. So, and I worked a program like that, and I worked a program like that when I worked with Maryland, where the homeowners got money to fix up their house in exchange for leasing the renting them to low to moderate income. I can't remember the actual restrictions. So the program got off the ground, and it was a 10-year forgiveness program where they reduced the balance of what you borrowed by 10%. And when I picked up that program, none of the landlords were complying. Every single property that I went to that was given the money, they may have started off and then they wouldn't send the information on the tenant to make sure that it was an affordable unit. And then we went and some of the buildings were just abandoned. It's like putting perfume on a pig for that program. I hate to sound like that because it didn't really serve a purpose. And we weren't talking about $500,000. We were talking about millions of dollars that were poured into, and a lot of it was poured into the city of Baltimore. And these landlords never followed through on the affordable housing and after they were given the money to fix up the units. So I didn't see it successful, but that was my first experience in it too.
Yeah.
So
So
Dan, what do you think the likelihood is that a lot of the recommendations for each jurisdiction get implemented, or how long there's another 5 years before you do something? Is that sort of the time frame that you've given each jurisdiction for implementing their proposals?
Yeah, well, the whole document is a 5-year plan, and so I kind of help monitor the regional ones, and we do the best we can. I mean, historically, there's a couple ways to look at this. One is to kind of aim low in a way that you can definitely do it, or you can aim high and try to get there. And the advocates in this region have preferred that we aim high, even if we don't always get there. And so that's what we are doing. If you look at the regional, I'm most familiar with the regional list. it's pretty ambitious, and and I'm one person.
Very
So
ambitious.
so we do as best we can, and part of the monthly housing committee meetings are kind of keeping the dialogue with the stakeholders and practitioners and advocates to make sure that we're addressing the things that are the most pressing. And so, but yeah, the both for us cooperating voluntarily as a region and for each local jurisdiction, it's supposed to be a 5-year plan. So the idea is these will get done over the next 5 years.
Another thing we talked about at the Lighthouse Shelter was kind of like corporate housing, where, you just make it whole at the end. You're asking people to rent to these high-risk tenants, and we'll get it back to square one, and they have to rent it again. Has anybody been working with that or had any success with that?
You mean like funds for repairs and that kind of thing to kind
Yeah.
of refresh the units between tenants?
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna put these high-risk tenants in there. If they trash it, we'll make it whole, and then you rent it again, but they're kind of tied in to having to rent it to another one of our clients.
I know there have been efforts to do that. I don't know, like for example, HUD, I don't know how much this might continue, but HUD had been, or Congress actually had been appropriating money for mobility counseling. We applied regionally for this demonstration program and didn't get it, and then we were not able to get an application in for the next one, it was not even the first one was a whole randomized control trial. It was all very rigorous, and the second one was really just money for mobility counseling, and unfortunately we just weren't able to get an application in for that one. But I believe that those types of programs, sometimes those programs include money for things like that as incentives for landlords. So I'm not sure
We
where.
talked about it. We got caught up in the old classic analysis paralysis, and then everybody lost their minds, and then we didn't move forward. But it seems like a low risk option for landlords.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. The tough thing is finding the money for that's what we're struggling with this mobility counseling for regional project-based vouchers. Our idea first was to charge it to the development, like, I mean, these are really valuable vouchers, it's like $1,000 a month, over 20 or 40 years, like that's quite a bit of money, and that it helps developers borrow more to build their development. So we said, hey, we just need like $2,500 up front to kind of get people in here. So they were happy to do it, but then the state, Maryland DHCD said, no, everybody would do that then. Like, because apparently people who provide services to vulnerable tenants want to fund that through the development. Like everyone would want to charge their thing to the development, and then the cost of the development would go up and up and up. So they've said no to that, and so we're trying to work with them. I guess this session is not going to happen, and the state, of course, now is in a budget crunch too. But I know we were hoping that there might be some way to identify some funding source to do that, but that's always the challenge, where do you find the money for that?
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions, comments?
Well, the only comment I had is I really enjoyed the presentation.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Well, great discussion, great questions.
Very,
Really
very
appreciate it.
educational, and sometimes we don't know everything that's going on, but the stuff that you put together that gave some of us a real vision of what's going on around the state. So thank you so much for your hard work and for coming
Thank
to
you.
our meeting as well.
Really appreciate that. And it's great to see all of you. Yeah.
It's good to see you.
Now, how old is this a relatively new commission, or has this been around for a long time? I don't have a sense.
Been around a while. It started originally don't remember, I don't know when, maybe Terry knows, but it
Well,
started
it's
originally
been,
as a,
yeah, it's been different iterations, and it was a
right,
committee that included council, the alder people. So,
Yeah, because I did come before the pandemic. We were finishing up our last one just
right.
before the pandemic. And so I came to Annapolis once, and I'm trying to think if it was this group.
I think it
And
might have been. I
Yeah,
was
I
on,
think it probably was.
and it was down City Hall, probably.
yeah, and it was,
Yeah,
I can't remember if it was late 2019 or very early. It was probably late 2019, frankly. But it was a neat gathering, back when we assumed we would be in person.
But we've changed, and now we're a commission, and we're just advisory, and we don't have, we're not a committee anymore, and working with this directly with the alder people. So it's a little different.
right. Originally we had as a committee, working with the aldermen, we had a role in approving CDBG grantees, et
Ah,
cetera.
mhm.
We don't do that anymore
But
as a commission.
our mission's actually gotten broader, but we
Right,
don't have any power.
right. We have no power, but we have a broader portfolio, I suppose. Um,
And they're
it's
a
been
wonderful
around
group of
quite a
people,
while.
Dan. They're a wonderful group of people.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Denise.
Agreed.
Mhm.
I second that.
Yeah, I can tell. I mean, I was a history major in college, so I just love the
Background stories.
yeah, and also the value of people with different perspectives who've been doing this a while, who can bring that all to bear is really is something. So it's great to talk to all of you. You are an amazing group.
It was a great
You guys
presentation.
have done a terrific amount of work, and I think the report is going to be, if people look at it and follow it, and all of us try to implement the recommendations for each jurisdiction, it's going to be, it will have an impact.
It should be good, right?
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know, Patrick, how much, I know Melissa obviously participated. I don't know how much she's talked about it with your board, or if she has at all, but be
Yeah,
curious to see.
yeah, we have, plus we need to do our own affirmative fair housing marketing plan. It sort of flows into what Dan did too. So a lot of information that sort of cross pollinates.
Right. And with the trying to implement the Choice Neighborhoods grant probably as well. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, hopefully get an implementation grant. That could, I mean, I know the stuff that's going up on the Perkins site in Baltimore City is really quite something. It's remarkable. So it'd be great to have that in Annapolis too.
That Perkins was the school, right? It was a school?
No, it was Perkins Homes. It was a public
Oh,
housing site.
Perkins Homes. Okay, all right.
Yeah, a big public housing site. And then there was another one, Somerset, which got demolished in the 2000s. And they're redeveloping both of those sites. And it looks great. It's really beautiful, actually. So,
What, Perkins Homes?
yeah, I mean, they're redeveloping it into more homes. So they're replacing all the public housing, but then they're adding, I think some with higher income affordability and then some market
Yeah,
rate
it's
units.
kind
So
of like
they're
a
making
mixed
it
use
truly
so
a-
that you can offset the cost of the
They're
low
playing with these
units.
core.
I was shocked to see they were doing pole homes because they did everything on that side. So when they was over there in the 90s, they should have just included pole homes. And
Hmm.
are they doing something with Poppleton over there too?
Oh boy, Poppleton.
Oh,
That's
yeah, been around forever and a day, right?
well, and the city originally contracted with this developer who just didn't come through on things. So they just said the city finally just severed their relation. They tried to sever their relationship with the developer years ago, and the
Mm-hmm.
developer sued and it went to court, and the judge said, "Oh, Baltimore City, you can't do that. You got to keep working with this guy." So then it didn't work for a bunch of other years, and the city tried again, and they were able to do it this time. So hopefully they can
Good.
get a bit more of a fresh start there.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, we thank you very much
Yeah,
for
great to
coming
join you.
and and if you could share that presentation with
Yeah.
Denise, then Denise can get it to all of us.
I'll PDF these slides and send them to Denise right now, so you can get them.
That'd be great.
Nancy, can I do it in the morning? Because I'm a little tired now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You don't have to do it
Yeah.
tonight. You
They'll
don't,
be
you don't have
waiting
to
for
do it
you. They'll be
tonight.
waiting
Come
for
on,
you.
Denise.
Don't worry about
it. I'll get it to you.
Yeah.
it.
All right. Well, it's great to see everybody. I guess.
Good to see you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Yeah. Have a
Good to see
great
you.
night.
Thank
all right.
you.
Take care.
Too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Any further business for all of us? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? There's nobody to oppose it. So we are adjourned until